They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
Oh, if Jeremy Hill can hold on to a fucking football.
That doesn't make sense.
You're listening to the P&E Bengals Fan Podcast.
3, 2, 1.
I remember the days when we were out of the playoff race in week 4, and I'm just glad those days are over. It was so frustrating to look up after 3 weeks and you got blown out by 3 teams, and you can tell the talent level isn't even close to beating the rest of the teams on your schedule. So I remember those days. So from my perspective, I always try to be optimistic and realistic. And, as much as everybody complains about Andy Dalton and Marvin Lewis, and to be honest with you, Marvin Lewis does definitely have a touch of Marty Schottenheimer disease. And Marty Schottenheimer obviously was the coach of the Browns and the Chargers for a long time. And same thing. He gets to the playoffs, lose the big ones. But he was a great, excellent regular season coach. And Marvin Lewis is kind of just bringing that tradition on back. And I'll say this, that is a huge debate right now between Bengals fans. If you ask Bengals fans what they think about Marvin Lewis as a coach, I think you'll get a split. I think you'll get the people who are very upset that he can't get us past the playoff round. And then there are those of us who lived through the 90s and the Jeff Blake years and the David Klingler years and whatever, that really appreciate what Marvin Lewis has brought to the team. But for me personally, I thought the last 3 years that Marvin Lewis would make it just an excellent GM. He needs to just be a GM. He's a great eye for talent. He knows what he's looking for when it comes to football players. He knows what he wants. He rarely misses on guys. But when it comes to the X's and O's in the playoffs, man, he gets smoked half the time. And to be honest with you, he usually doesn't have his team up to play. And a lot of those playoff games, they were clearly the better team against the Jets and Mark Sanchez with Carson Palmer, against the Texans when they had, the 8th-string water boy quarterback coming out. If you get beat in a playoff game by a 3rd-string quarterback, there's some issues there with your X's and O's. I'm sorry. So to me, people are like, oh, they should fire Marvin Lewis. I'm like, no. Don't fire Marvin Lewis. Just promote him. Make him the GM. And we honestly, if I had to pick out of all of our former coaches that have now moved on to head coaching positions, where Mike Zimmer has found some success in Minnesota, Jay Gruden just won the NFC East title last year with the Skins, and now Hugh Jackson leaves for the Browns. Out of those 3 guys, the one I was really hoping they would keep was probably Zimmer, because I like his no-nonsense ways. I love his tough approach. And I think he's more of your classic ball coach, if you will. No nonsense. The only thing he cares about is football. The only thing he wants to talk about is football. And he's cool with that. And I like that about a coach. I think, obviously, out of the 3, second, I would have kept Hugh Jackson, just because he's so innovative, and he honestly did a lot with that Raiders team some years back, and they really didn't have a lot. And he got them on the doorsteps of the playoffs, even after losing their quarterback. I think he has sound tactics, and he's great with the X's and O's. I would have kept Hugh Jackson, and then Jay Gruden, honestly, the Redskins can have him. I just didn't really have a lot of faith in him overall.
Just to elaborate on that, I was going to say that we were excited when we got him because who did he replace? Brad. What was the offensive coordinator's name?
Oh, Brad Kozlowski or whatever. Dude, he was a joke.
He was just so garbage. So we were super excited at the time to get Jay Gruden, but after having him 2 seasons, we were like, yeah, it's time for a change. He's not really the guy.
Well, the thing is, Jay Gruden wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad, but
he ran. We had some good offenses under Gruden. But he became very predictable.
Yes.
And not only that, but he strays away from the run way too much. He starts to get pass happy. And in this league, and I know it's a passing league, I know everybody says, oh, it's a passing league. But the bottom line is you still got to run the football. You got to. Unless you have, Peyton Manning or in his prime or Tom Brady in his prime, then you can be a passing team, or Kurt Warner for that matter. But when you're talking about Andy Dalton, and Andy Dalton is a pretty good quarterback. There's nothing to say bad about him, but the bottom line is that if you're counting on Andy Dalton in a playoff game to throw 42 times, that is not a winning combination.
Yeah,
So,
that's a recipe for disaster right there.
boy, big time recipe. Just add salt, and bake at 425, and you're done. So I would have to say that I would really have loved to see Marvin Lewis go to the GM spot and us keep Zimmer. And I think eventually that'll happen as far as Marvin Lewis going to the GM spot, because he actually discussed it with Hugh Jackson before Hugh Jackson left for Cleveland. He actually kind of set up a succession plan where Hugh Jackson would take over the team and he would move up or whatever. So at least it tells you that it's in their thought process, that the Bengals at least thought about that. Like, in a couple of years, let's move Marvin up. And what I think you're going to end up seeing, I don't think you'll see a GM spot for the Cincinnati Bengals until the owner passes away, until Mike Brown passes away and the daughter, Katie Blackburn, takes over. I think once Blackburn takes over, I think at that point, you're going to see them go into more of a traditional setup as far as the front offices. I think at that point you see Marvin Lewis head up. But it also depends on where the Bengals are at that time. I mean, are we still competitive? Does the roster still look great? Or are we in for a complete overhaul at that point? Do we have a really bad season where things go wrong and now Katie Blackburn wants to change the whole game? Because we don't really get a good idea as to what she's looking at. And you have to think to yourself that Katie Blackburn and her husband, Troy, are both sitting back and they have ideas of how they want to run the team when it eventually is theirs, because they know it's going to be theirs. So, and it's going to be interesting having a woman owner in the NFL and the Good Old Boys Network, so that's going to be curious. Although Katie Blackburn's a big enough figure in the organization now that she'll have respect from other owners and things of that nature because she's been around the game. But I think that's going to be when you see it. I think once Mike Brown completely steps down or passes away, Katie Blackburn takes over. She throws Marvin Lewis in at GM, and then hopefully there's a good coach out there we can grab, and we go from there. That's my take after seeing what they said about Hugh Jackson and a succession plan, which also shows you how much they respect Hugh Jackson.
As always, follow us, hit us up on Twitter. Till next time.